Well, welcome back to my channel. And here today, I'm going to discuss one of my posts that I made on Blue Life like a while back. And it's called Result Fallacy. And what exactly is that? And the symbolism behind the picture that I chose is that even though that person is on first place, it still seems like he's sad, right? So it seems like he's anxious, depressed, maybe even, right? Just feeling bitter, you know? And second post, if you slide in, you'll notice incorrect path of experts. What exactly is that? I'll read it out and I'll explain it. Just because an expert, quote unquote, has gotten results through an incorrect method, it doesn't justify that their way should be followed. More times than not, these experts tend to get problems in the long term and pay for the consequences since they chase short-term success. Okay? What does all that basically mean? It's basically saying just because some, Harvard professor said something about, very incorrect, right? Basically, this expert stated an incorrect opinion, right? But because he's an expert, he's supposedly right. This could also go back to the other post that I made about accolade fallacy, but result fallacy, right? Is that, oh, he got results, so therefore it's the correct way, which is obviously not correct. And then I list out examples of an example of where this result fallacy fails. Third post, leg extensions, right? It's a very common exercise that's found in pretty much every fitness gym, right? But what is the problem with leg extensions? They may give you bigger, more muscular legs, but they're terrible for your knees due to the fact they place maximum force on the tiniest portion of the cartilage, which is the back of the patella, the kneecap, basically. And this is how you get messed up knees, right? Right. I mean, even Cain Velasquez, right, who ended up becoming UFC champion, right? He may have done all of that, but in the process of that, he got very messed up knees, right? And to this day, he's suffering the consequences of it, right? Another example, right? I believe it's the fourth post. Neck bridges, another popular exercise that mostly wrestlers like to use, right? But even other people, because they want to build a muscular neck, will use this, right? Because neck bridges do build muscular and strong necks, they do. But there is a hidden cost, right? And the cost is that it can cause compression, which leads to neck pain, headaches, spine, and disc problems. Funny enough, Mike Tyson used to do this, and that video of him saying that his back is broken. I mean, granted, it might have been something else, but I wouldn't be surprised if neck bridges was basically the cause of that, right? And the other problems that he probably has, right? It's caused a lot of problems, so that's why you should refrain from doing these, right? And then the fifth slide, right? I basically say, there's two, short-term and long-term, the signs, right? Basically, I'll read it first. One should avoid results that are successful in the short term, but have negative consequences in the long term. It's better to have results that are beneficial in the long term, even if in the short term you don't make any, right? Obviously, ideally, it would be best to find successful results you can get in the short term and long term without any bad repercussions. What does all that mean? I feel like it was pretty obvious what I'm saying here, but just to clarify it even further, basically, if something gives you success in the short term, but you have problems in the long term, don't do it. It's not worth it. It is better to do the opposite. You may not have success in the short term, but if in the long term it brings you success, then do that. It's better to do that, But obviously, ideally, you should go for things if you can, if it's possible, to go for things that have success in the short term and the long term. That's the most ideal thing that a person can do. And now, here we go. Wait, experience and implementation. As great, right? As great as research can be, it also is very problematic to just base things off of just research, right? I'm not saying you should deny it, right? But it's not the end all be all, is what I'm saying. And I'll just read it. Sometimes it isn't enough to just research the results of other people, especially if they vary greatly. Like, for example, in sports, best example, one must go through experience and find the best results for themselves. Look for the best results, but be versatile. Research is meaningless without execution, right? I'll give you an example, like sports, like I just said, right? Uh, Actually, I'll give a different example, like fitness. Fitness, right? There might be like all these like workouts you can do, and there might be like these quote unquote best workouts. There might be a little bit of truth to that. It depends. You know what I mean? I don't necessarily think there's a best workout per se for a certain muscle group. It can be more effective depending on what you want to hit, right? And again, some people might be lacking in one area more than the other, right? It's all about trial and error. Just because Arnold Schwarzenegger did like chest flies, right? Doesn't mean that you have to, right? It's not it's not like the best like indicator for that's why you should do it, right? You need to try it out yourself and see what works and what doesn't work. Obviously, do your research, right? But don't blindly follow it. Oh, because this one study said you should do it, right? That I have to do it, and that's the best end all be all, right? Because the thing with research is that, like, remember I had a statistics teacher, right? And like when I took his class, I kind of realized it's like low key how flawed like statistics can be, because it's all based on trial and error, and like all these people that are doing the research, like like again with fitness, right? They're testing out which exercise led to the most growth, right? But they didn't take into account how much sleep this person got, what their diet was like, are they a beginner, what's their age, like are they a complete like beginner, or have they been doing this for a while, right? Because if you've been doing it for a while, you're not going to get as much of a result compared to someone who's completely new, obviously. So again, someone might grow like 15% of muscle, right? Well, I don't know why I said 15%, but 15 pounds of muscle, right? From this one exercise, right? But they're a complete beginner, right? So obviously they're gonna show a more skyrocket approach to building muscle, whereas someone who's completely new, even though he's completely jacked, right? But he only had like maybe like a 1 or 2% increase in muscle, right? So it's of course it's not fair because he's been doing it for so long. He's already got so much results behind him, but it's that they didn't take that into account. So there's so many things that they didn't factor in, right? Like sleep schedule and everything, right? It's all important. Diet again, like what were these guys eating? You know what I mean? Like, diet obviously is very important for building muscle, but very rarely do I actually see it being held accountable in like fitness research, which I feel like is a big flaw. The only way you could have like the perfect like research is like if you got like a clone of like of literally the same people, and you did the experiments and you held them all accountable, which obviously like this is going to be like impossible to do. Almost like it would cost way too much money to like do this, right? You're like almost impossible. Like it might just cost way too much to clone that many people, right? And just like like have someone like literally just watch them 24/7, see if they're getting the same amount of sleep, right? Like nothing could be off by even a minute, right? Nothing could be even off by like a tablespoon, right? So that's like the thing here. And then to go to my next post, I mean next like post, yeah, basically. The variance of results. I use an MMA example here because I do practice it and I do know about the sport like pretty well, I would say. So this example of the variance of results, two different outcomes, even though it's the same exact thing. So just to give you some background for those of you that don't know MMA that much, Luke Rockhold, former UFC middleweight champion, right? One of the biggest critiques that he has is that he fights with his hands down, which I think is such a bad, how do I say it? It's just like, that's such a bad, way of, determining that, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a bad way of determining that he does this and that's why he fails. You know what I mean? Even though, there's so many successful fighters that have fought with their hands down and won and have become great. And, for being fair here, he did end up becoming middleweight champion, so that's not really the best critique. I would more so say his critique more so lies, more so his head movement, I would say, rather than, fighting with his hands down. Then I use Wonder Boy as an example because, again, he's a successful fighter who has fought with his hands down, right? And basically, yeah, he fights with his hands down. Luke Rockhold, realistically, if I'm not mistaken, he only puts down one hand, right? I believe it's his right hand. Yeah, I believe it's his right hand that he puts down, right? His lead hand. Whereas Wonder Boy, he puts down both hands, and he's still successful, right? So I'll read what I wrote here. Just because Luke Rockhold loses with his hands down doesn't mean the style is ineffective. Especially when Wonder Boy has shown hands down to be effective in fighting. And this is important right here. Results alone shouldn't dictate your premises of effectiveness or ineffectiveness, especially if the results vary greatly, which they do in MMA, right? You will have many people that fight with their hands down and be successful, many people that don't fight with their hands down and not be successful. You know what I mean? Right? Like, we see a lot of people with their hands up, tense, shelled up, and they still get knocked out. Just as, you probably will see people who fight with their hands down and not get knocked out. So, you know what I mean? It's not the end all be all. Majority. It's good to look into it, but it's not the end all be all, is what I'm saying. I will end it off this point right here, is that Floyd Mayweather, even though it's boxing, right, one of the best defensive boxers of all time. What was his stance? The Philly shot, right? One hand down, left hand up. That's it. One hand down, left hand up. But he still became the greatest. Arguably the greatest boxer of all time, right? Arguably, regardless of what your opinion is on him, you cannot deny that man's skill. You know what I mean? And a lot of these people, according to what they say, you should be fighting with your hands up. Floyd Mayweather, majority of the time, had the Philly shell, and he was the best at it. You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? That whole hands down thing, or hands up, I should say. Hands up is not always the best defense, right? It's not the end all be all, especially when Floyd Mayweather, essentially got to such a high level in boxing with his hands down, right? And now the final slide, the conclusion. Avoid looking at subjective results as objective. One needs to understand that results through an incorrect method is never right, even if you achieve short-term success. Longevity is important, and the results must satisfy lastingly. Sometimes the results can vary greatly, and one must realize that the norm that is viewed dogmatically doesn't always apply. As well as that research isn't enough if it is never implemented and experienced. Right? What does that all that basically mean? Even though I feel like this is pretty obviously stated, I could see how some people might confuse and see it as some over complex thing, but it's not. It's very simple. Basically, don't look at some like particular study and be like, okay, the study said so, so I really need to do it like that. I would say try it out. If it works for you, if it doesn't work for you, there's so many like factors that have not been taken up into account for that study. How can you rely on it? You know what I mean? Like it's. I'm not saying like studies shouldn't be done, but I'm just saying there's just so many factors not included into those studies, right? Again, I can mention like where some of those fitness people, right, where some of them smokers, that they have any bad habits, did they drink alcohol, right? That can also hinder performance. You know what I mean? And skew the study. You know what I mean? Again, you need to realize that no matter, and again, the opposite, which is basically like if a lot of people are doing this one thing, even if it's very incorrect, like neck bridges or leg extensions, right? We know the bad harmful effects that it can have on the body, right? And like there's already alternatives, especially like look for the best alternative, right? And make that the main thing that you do, right? Don't look for short-term success, right? Especially if it messes you up in the long term. It's better to look for something that may not work in the short term. It may not give you success in the short term, but it gives you success in the long term. Look for that. But ideally, something that gives you success in the short term and the long term. That's obviously, you know, the utopian ideal, right? That we are trying to focus on. But that doesn't always exist. You know what I mean? So that's the problem. It doesn't always exist, unfortunately, right? And again, try not to be dogmatic with your studies and like research, right? As good as research can be, like the thing with statistics is it's not a complete like science. It's not like a factual thing always. You know what I mean? That's like this is why you will see a lot of people get like different results even if they're doing the same exact thing. Right? You will see a very amount of great results, just like I told you about the MMA example and even the fitness example. Right? I mean, there's other examples out there that can highlight this point of result fallacy, right? You know, and again, even though I read the conclusion, I probably should have started off by reading the caption, but it's fine. I'll read the caption now. What is basically the result fallacy? This fallacy assumes that just because there are results through an incorrectly flawed method, it must be okay to follow. Just because results exist doesn't necessarily mean it is the only way to achieve results. You can achieve great results even through incorrect methods, but that isn't an ideal or even a good way to achieve results, because in the long term it will affect you badly. One must try to remain objective with achieving their results, looking at the short-term and long-term success. Right? 100%. This is what you should be looking for. You have to look for the short-term and long-term. Don't do anything that's going to harm you in the long term. Right? Right. And of course, I guess the worst thing would be to do something that harms you in the short term and in the long term. Right? But usually people, I feel like for the most part, are aware of that, right? So they may not do that inherently, but you know, usually when it's disguised as short-term success and long-term regret, that's where people will fall into this result fallacy thing, right? And be very careful about this, right? Because this result fallacy, like it's not just sports, right? Or fitness or whatever. It can very much well be into anything in life, right? Literally anything, you know? But I feel like what I described here is like, you can pretty much, you know, take this post and translate it to any aspect of your life of result fallacy, you know? So, you know, think about this consciously with the result fallacy, because there aren't that many people that really look into it, Like they will just do something because someone else is doing it and they might see the results, but like enough, you know. Remember, we're looking for success not in just the short term, but in the long term. We want the ultimate success, right? You know, and I feel like what I just described here basically summarizes this post. And honestly, I just love breaking down these posts that I made a while back, and inshallah, I'll get back into it. I've just been kind of busy lately, but I hope you guys can see the wisdom in what I just said. You know, result fallacy. There isn't much more I feel like I could add on to it. Maybe if I I can come back to this post again if I like recall anything that maybe I missed here. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed what I just said. And please like and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.